that, or shall I go ahead?
Go ahead, and if she's able to connect by phone, we will elevate her and have her join whenever she can.
All right, great. All right, moving on to item 7.0, call to order, roll call.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, everyone. Item 7.0, this is the committee meeting for nursing practice. I will take roll call to establish a quorum, and we will move on with the meeting. Dolores Trujillo, I'm present. Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez present.
Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz present.
All right, we've established that we have a quorum. Item 7.1, let's open for public comment for items not on the agenda.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give reminders as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comments, and I believe Mary is back. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Is Mary back?
I see, I elevated her, but I don't see any video or audio.
All right, well, we can move on with the vote. Item 7.2, review and vote on whether to approve previous meeting minutes. These were the minutes for the January 26, 2023 meeting. I would like to make a motion to accept the NPC meeting minutes from January 26, 2023, and allow BRN staff to make non-substantive changes to correct name misspellings and or typos that may be discovered in the document.
This is Vicki. I'll second.
Thank you, Vicki. Can we open it up for public comment?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. All right, we'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz, yes.
Thank you. The motion carries. Item 7.3, this is information only. Discussion on the request of certified 103 nurse practitioners to remove the 103 distinction due to employment issues. Lori?
Sorry, this is Reza. Just for the record, I see Mary is in the list.
She is in the list.
She's on
She's
the
had
list.
video issues, but it is showing right now that her phone is connected. We'll see if we can get her off mute.
Okay. Is that like a *6 thing or something?
I think that's what it is. Yeah. Mary, are you able to hit *6 and come off mute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yay!
Oh my God. Oh, I've got the help desk here too. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Mary, were you listening to the vote on the last agenda item, the minutes?
No, I did not. I apologize. I
Okay.
missed that.
That's okay. Do you want to be noted as an abstain from that one or
We took a
That's fine.
vote.
absent either way? I was just giving you a chance to vote on it if you wanted to. If not, the minutes can just note you as a absent for it or an abstain.
Either way, I reviewed the minutes and I would have voted to approve.
Okay.
Whatever's easy.
I think that can be noted as your vote. There was no public comment on it or any board discussion other than the motion to approve it. So just wanted to clear that up for the record. Sorry for the interruption. And glad you're here.
Okay, I apologize for all my problems today. So we obviously called the meeting to order, and there's a quorum because everyone voted. So, Lori, did we already reorder the agenda because we have an outside speaker?
Not yet. We started with 7.3, which is perfectly fine, but we haven't opened it up yet. So we can do the report out of the committees first. That would be best.
Okay, so we'll start then with report out from the committees, which is that you, Lori?
Yes, it is. I'm trying to pull up my stuff to
Okay, good.
to get there with you.
And this is, I'm sorry, 7.5 is the advisory
7.5.
committee updates. Okay.
Yeah.
And is our speaker for 7.4 kind of available at a certain time? Is that why we're?
Yes, we're
Got it.
reordering because she is not available until noon. So we are going to move through the committee updates. Then we'll go to 7.3. And at that point, if she is not on, we will take a lunch break until noon when she will come on. Okay, great. So we will start with 7.3. Board moderator, if you can move the items forward to 7.3. We'll start with the report out of the committees.
7.5.
Sorry, 7.5. Thank you, Reza. A little discombobulated at this point. I was trying to puppeteer from the outside as well while this was going on. So we're getting this going. Okay, so the first one would be the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee. Just so you guys are aware, they have not met since the January 26th meeting where we did an interested parties meeting. We do have a meeting that will be coming up soon. Sorry, I don't have the specific date. I'm just trying to pull it up here really quick. We're actually not having a meeting until September 12th, according to our board website. So there's not much to update. What I can do as part of that is in the last advisory committee meeting that was not the 890 disciplinary guidelines stakeholder meeting, there was some discussion around the retired and legacy national certifications. And so there was information shared that the board was not able to move forward with allowing them to be licensed as a 103 NP. And we are continuing to work with various organizations and outreach on that. A lot of people that have brought forward that is concerning, that it eliminated those legacy and retired certifications from being able to move for the 103. And I'm continuing almost on a daily basis to get reach out by nurse practitioners who believe that is unfair and something that the board has control over. So I just wanted to make sure that we have a standard voice with that, letting people know that that was written into the bill, AB 890, and then subsequently passed into law, that in order for the person to move to the 103, that OPES needed to do a review of examination. And with the that process, it's very clear that the retired or national certification do not have an examination that is being offered at all. Therefore, that examination cannot be assessed, and independent practice cannot be competency for independent practice by utilizing that test cannot be completed through that process that was required. Additionally, as part of AB 890, there was written in there that we would also do a regular review of those exams. And again, it just goes back to that exam is not there and it's not available. So we cannot do that. And that is why those legacies and legacy and retired national certifications were not able to be put forward by our board to be included in the independent practice by becoming a 103 and ultimately a 104. We did meet with the bill's author and provide them that information. They wanted to know why the board had that hard stop. We shared the language that they had written into the bill and that was causing that hard block. And they are continuing to work with that. In the meantime, because they did not enter a cleanup bill this year, we are continuing to do the same process. It would require a legislative change for the board to do that. We cannot change it in regulation. The board has no authority over that. And so we are working with our nursing programs that offer NP programs throughout the state. And we have reached out to the National Certifying Board examinations. They have recommended that the nursing programs that offer the various tracks that would allow for a nurse practitioner to become board certified in a current certification to perform gap analysis. Those gap analysis can be used by these programs to determine anybody that was educated in the prior preparation for national certification to be able to move them to a current national certification. An example would be an acute care NP to now being an adult geriatric acute care NP. So they would do a gap analysis of the acute care NP curriculum that that nurse practitioner took, and then they would compare that with their current curriculum they offer for the adult geriatric acute care. And then they would work with that nurse practitioner to get them the education that would need to be obtained by them specifically for that, which would be much smaller. So it may be a post-grad certificate program. It may be giving them experiential credit as part of the program, and then having them just complete a couple additional classes so that they could then qualify to obtain the current national certification. So that is the current guidance that has been provided by the national board certifying agencies that is going out to our nurse practitioner programs here. There are a few academic institutions in the state that have said that they are currently doing this and they are offering those pathways for those nurse practitioners that want to pursue that. So that is the biggest update around that prior nurse practitioner advisory committee meeting and the information that was shared out. And we'll continue to work with that as a as board staff get license request to provide that additional guidance. So I can move on at this point to the Nurse Midwife Advisory Committee report out. That is a very similar report out. The Nurse Midwife Advisory Committee has not met since the January disciplinary guidelines committee meeting. We will have a upcoming meeting that is scheduled for the same day, September 12th, and we'll work to get that up and running. We do anticipate that various subcommittees will start working on updating some of the disciplinary guidelines. That seemed to be the biggest focus with the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee. to really get that input from them through the disciplinary process for their midwives. So that is the biggest update for Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee, and then we can go to NEWAC. So NEWAC, we actually did have a meeting. We had a meeting that was just held recently. The date on that was June 15th. It was a interested parties meeting. As part of that interested parties meeting, we reached out to all the deans and directors within the state for our various academic programs. We sent out various messaging to other organizations as well as to our listserv to really invite the stakeholders to come in and have some conversation on items of focus that are around the Nursing Education and Workforce Advisory Committee. As you guys are aware of, the Nursing Education and Workforce Advisory Committee is a committee that was combined by legislative recommendation a few years back. We had a separate education committee and a separate workforce committee, and knowing that they overlap significantly, they recommended that we combine those committees, and we did. And then during COVID, they were obviously focused on much greater things than having advisory committees during that point. And so we did restart those with a different kind of makeup in the advisory committee, and then it was put forth and put into statute by our Sunset Bill last year. So with this, they are focused on education and they are focused on workforce advisory. A specific focus in that legislation was for simulation. We do have a subcommittee that was formed to address simulation. And we have heard that they are ready to report out their recommendations at the next Nursing Education Workforce Advisory Committee, which is scheduled for the fall. So at this committee, simulation was not necessarily part of the conversation. It did kind of get back there just a little bit when we were talking about the other agenda items. The one agenda items that they were looking at was looking at the retention and resilience of the registered nursing workforce, and that included the faculty in our nursing programs. That faculty requirement is at the RRN. So our nursing faculty are RNs and part of the RN workforce. So we did group them together and received some conversation on that, heard about some of the concerns, provided a lot of education. Our faculty requirements are different than the faculty requirements that the Community College Chancellor's Office or the CSU's Chancellor's Office and a lot of accreditors require. Most of them require a master's or higher for faculty while really supporting a terminal degree. There is not really a pathway in that can be utilized for anybody that doesn't have one of those, either a graduate or a terminal degree. Our board does not see it that way. Our board, within the regulatory requirements, we allow for entry in regardless of degree. So if you have an associate degree or a diploma as an RN, if you've been licensed and working as an RN for at minimum a year within the last 5 years in a nursing specialty like med-surg or obstetrics, you can come in as a clinical teaching assistant. You would assist in a clinical setting with an instructor of record. You could pass meds, perform treatments, work one-on-one with a student that may have some additional remedial requirements where they need some additional assistance to get the content in and be successful. They can also help out in a laboratory setting at the academic institution where they're doing simulation or doing task and skill assessment. They can also guest lecture in a theory component, proctor exams, provide tutoring, work for student success. There's a lot of value to a clinical teaching assistant. Then if you have a bachelor's degree, we do allow through our regulations that a nurse can be what is called an assistant instructor. That assistant instructor can take an entire clinical group out into the facility and manage them. They can be there face to face, work with the hospitals or the additional or the community clinical settings. They can bring all the students through there, provide some evaluation input, and really guide them through that process. They additionally are able to manage a excuse me, lab or a skill set, lab skills or simulation setting at the academic institution as well. And they are able to, again, guest lecture. They can also lecture the majority of the content as well, as long as they're working with a lead instructor for grading and ownership of that. And that is typically managed through what we call a content expert. And then ultimately, we do have the instructor designation, which does require a master's degree. We do not have any designation within faculty, directors of nursing, assistant directors of nursing, content expert, et cetera, that require a terminal degree. When faced with the faculty shortage, that is imperative that we have various pathways into this. They get exposure. People may want to then further their degree to become an instructor or become, a nursing program administrator. And so that is a pathway that was discussed and really looking at that. The other things that were discussed as part of the really looking at retention and resilience is what are the direct care and faculty facing. There was a lot of wage discussion. There was a lot of risk discussion. There was really just kind of treatment and support. Theory practice gap was also brought up, making sure that when our nurses are graduating and entering the workforce, that they're able to do so successfully and still feel supported in that transition. So there was a lot of information that was shared under that particular topic. The next topic that was open up was, again, the academic practice gap. And really just ensuring that our nurses who become faculty have some additional support and training with that. The chair of that committee, who is also part of Health Impact, offers a training through what he has. It's called a Benner Institute, and they talk about faculty training and onboarding because our faculty, although required to be RNs, and have a graduate degree at minimum for the instructor level or the content expert, haven't necessarily received formal teaching training. And so it's really important to give them that kind of insight and input into how to, do curricular development, how to work with various students and learning abilities, as well as manage his pedagogy and just working through that process. And so there was a lot of discussion around that. Also discussion around new grad programs that are out there that are having to kind of pick up the differences of the COVID kind of waivers and the leniencies and the new laws that were put into place that allowed for less in-person care and kind of fast tracked our students through the process, both in our state and out of state. So we do get endorsement RNs that have various academic preparations because of the COVID timeline, and all of our healthcare organizations are kind of managing through those changes. And so we did have some discussions on that. And then the very last discussion that was brought up in the Nursing Education Workforce Advisory Committee was that of clinical impaction, looking at clinical placements, any kind of clinical displacements, and various items around that. And so there was a lot of discussion of uses of consortiums, discussion of use of board data, what we get from our academic institutions, what they request from the healthcare institutions, how that kind of works through it. They did bring up different bills that the board has previously heard and taken positions on throughout this process as well that are coming up and kind of looking to address that clinical impaction. And so it was a very informative meeting. It went very well. A lot of good insight. And so we're now just waiting to hear what the subcommittees do with that additional information. Have them bring it back to the next scheduled Nursing Education Workforce Advisory Committee meeting that is scheduled for the fall. And that is September 28th. And then hopefully we will get some recommendations coming soon that will be made from that committee to come forward to our board as we started kind of conversation around all of these subjects in January of this year. So that is our update from NEWAC. And then the other two updates on here are Clinical Nurse Specialist Advisory Committee and the Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetist Committee. We did get members appointed to that in the from this perspective professions. Some of them have started in taking board orientation. We've reached out and made some contact with them. We are working through the onboarding process and still working, looking for a public member. So those applications and the call to action are still on our website. We did reach out specifically to the organizations for the various professions, see if they knew of any public member that may be interested, and we're waiting to have that filled. Upon having those filled, we are looking at trying to get fall meetings scheduled for both of these advisory committees, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done within the CNS and the CRNAs. Any questions from the committee before we open it up to public comment?
I don't have any questions.
Any questions? Okay, board moderator, would you open up for public comment, please?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give reminders as time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Alyssa Brown would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
I'm a clinical nurse specialist. I want to thank you for all the work you've done. I also wanted to just let people know that ANA, I was at ANA as a representative from California, also took up the issue of National Nursing Workforce Center Act, addressing the nursing staff crisis, understanding the value of nurses, and then the ICANN, approving care and access to nurses. So if you did not get that information, I would be happy to send it to you. We met with the legislators and we were very proud to say that California was one of the states that already was working on nursing workforce and had, you know, specific direction for that. So thank you for that. One more real quick question. I heard that there were some people who applied for the public member on these committees, and I wondered if you can tell us how many applications you've had. Thank you.
The last I checked, there were 2 people interested in the CNS committee and 0 for the CRNA committee. That is the extent of the application knowledge I have. And Alyssa, please send me any of that information. I'd be happy to have it. I may have it, I may be aware of it, but I might not. So please send it. I'll take a look.
Will do. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no other, I'm sorry, Vice President Mary Fagan, there are no other public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
please. And
Since that was
did we-
information only, we would not need a vote or a second or anything at that point. So we can move on to item 7.3.
Perfect. And Lori, do you have that discussion for 7.3 as well?
I do. Yes, I have all of these discussions. So thank you. So 7.3 is information only, and I really wanted to bring this to our board's attention. We did get some contact through our public information unit, which is also known as our call center. That recently came in. Reza, you were kind of copied on that communication as well through board staff, just letting you know that this is kind of coming up. And originally we thought that it was potentially a bigger issue than it's kind of turned out to be, but we did want to make sure that everybody was aware of this. We did receive a couple phone calls from nurse practitioners who had recently gained the designation on their license that they can be a 103 nurse practitioner. That is a designation that was provided to them by the passage of AB 890 being put into law, and now being part of our business professions codes, the sections 8.5 that talk specifically to the role of the nurse practitioner with a more independent practice than they've had before. The 3 levels that we currently have in California for a nurse practitioner is one of a nurse practitioner that is the traditional role that most of everybody is used to employing and working with and working under, and being seen and cared for, and that is the nurse that works under standardized procedures. Those standardized procedures are developed with a licensed healthcare facility, a physician that provides oversight, and the nurse practitioners, RNs, other advanced practice RNs that utilize those standardized procedures. Those standardized procedures are guidelines are set out in regulations. There's specific requirements that are within the standardized procedure that delineate what the education is, what the preparation is, what the competence is, what are the specific supervisory requirements. Does a physician have to be present? Do they have to be on site? Do they have to be in the room? Can they be in a remote location, etc.? It also decides on how often that competency needs to be assessed, the documentation, the referral, when do you call in a physician, when do you transfer care, et cetera. It is very clear on what is done through those standardized procedures in each of the healthcare facilities that utilize them to employ the advanced practice RN, and specifically in this part, the nurse practitioner. So with the 103 designation that came from the AB 890 passing, there is a transition of practice that needs to be completed. That is 3 years or 4,600 hours working in the education area that they specialize in. So if they are educated as a pediatric nurse practitioner, they would do clinical hours as part of those 3 years working as a pediatric nurse practitioner. And then prior to applying for their 103 designation, they would have to be nationally certified as a pediatric nurse practitioner. Once all of those things are lined up, they can then apply to the BRN to become a 103 NP. A provider that has worked alongside of them during the transition of practice attests that it has been completed. And then our board puts that designation on their license that says these nurse practitioners can perform the identical scope of practice that the standardized procedure nurse practitioner has, but they do not have to use the standardized procedure to be able to do that. They are able to do this in a group setting that is defined in law, as long as that group setting is working with at least one physician and surgeon. So the scope of practice of this nurse practitioner doesn't change. Their skills and abilities do not change. What does change is that the competency has been validated through OPES's review of the National Certifying Exam. and that they have passed that exam. They do hold board certification. They have completed the additional mentoring and clinical hours in the last 3 years with that oversight, working under standardized procedures, that now they can work in this group setting with a physician without having to utilize standardized procedures. Everything else stays the same. Their scope of practice, their education, their training, et cetera, does not change. So with that, they are able to work the additional 3 years as a 103 NP. As long as they stay in good standing, they can then apply to our board in late 2025 to 2026, and they could then become a 104 NP. Those 104 NPs, which do not exist yet in California, but they do have a pathway to get there, are able to work outside of the group setting without standardized procedures, with other specific criteria around that. So the change for that to go from 103 to 104 is the setting of the delivery of care, from being required to be within a group setting with a physician or surgeon to then having a more independent practice where they can work in their location without having to be in that group setting. Again, scope of practice stays the same. Training and education stays the same. Board certification is still required. So all of those competencies remain. And that is how that designation goes. This was hard fought by many nurse practitioners for many years through various organizations. And the board worked diligently to get regulations put in place for the deadline for this to become available at the beginning of this year, so just 6 months ago. It is available and people are now getting it. The problem we're running into is there are employers who do not know how to utilize this and may have concerns around this. So those additional designations, which you're able to work as a standardized procedure as a 103 NP or without standardized procedures as a 103 NP. So it should not, under any cost, have any effect on their employment where they would be forced to lose their employment. And that's kind of been the concern, because we did have a person call in. We believe they were employed at a location within Sharp in San Diego. And he had mentioned that he was told by his employer that he would lose his job as a nurse practitioner if he did not ask the board to remove the 103 designation off of his license. So that was concerning. We did reach out to legal. Reza can opine on that, on how a person can go about removing that, essentially surrendering, etc. But I think the biggest issue here is that this was something that you gained that shows that you have gained additional competence, that you are trusted to work in a more independent fashion. And because of that, that put this person's job at risk. So opening up to any questions, discussions, concerns that our board staff, our board members may have, or want additional discussion around that. And then Reza can, if you wanted to share how they could request to have this removed by surrendering it, I would appreciate that. I'm trying to find your email where you kind of went over that, and I'm not able to locate it at this point.
Sure, I can jump in if you want, or are there any committee members? Okay. So as far as the issue of surrendering, the question was, as it was initially presented, I was a little surprised that as I think Lori was, that this was presenting an issue for our 103 NPs, and that they were requesting to have this removed. As far as getting, surrendering it, there's not a defined process that I'm aware of, but the statutes generally, I know, at least kind of hint at the possibility of a licensee surrendering their license, in that they say specifically, if a licensee surrenders their license, the board doesn't lose jurisdiction. What the statutes that speak about surrender are kind of concerned about is somebody surrendering their license because they anticipate that they're going to be subject to discipline. A complaint might be filed against them down the line and they surrender it. So the statute says that the board retains jurisdiction in that case and can still take disciplinary action against them. So that's kind of a different, the statute's not directly on point about the process for surrendering or anything. It just speaks to the effect in that it doesn't necessarily deprive the board of enforcement jurisdiction and authority. With that said, again, it does contemplate that folks can surrender their licenses and therefore kind of presumably by extension their certificates, including a 103 NP certificate. So, I don't think it's something that comes up that often. And I think typically it's, done in one-off situations by way of a letter from the licensee, requesting that they surrender their license or their certification or whatever it be. Generally, the board would, I think, review to see if there's any complaints filed against them that are maybe haven't resulted in the filing of formal disciplinary action, but they're working their way through the system just to be sure. But as far as surrendering, hopefully it's not something that becomes more prevalent, because as Lori said, I think this was, there was a lot of work that went into getting this authority on the broader scale, and then this individual put in the work as well. So hopefully alongside that, there's, just greater awareness that'll catch on and education to kind of stem the need to surrender. But if that is a need, I think it's done in that way. Again, I don't know if there is a more formal mechanism. I don't believe you can do it via Breeze or anything like that.
Reza, can you speak to, or maybe Lori, this is perhaps more appropriate for you, but I know you've mentioned separately that there have been some education that's being offered for organizations to help them guide if they are going to have a mixture of 103 and regular, the 10, I think, are they 102s or it's just regular nurse practitioners, knowing that some will function under
standardized. We can call them standardized, yeah.
Okay.
Standardized
yeah. I mean, has there been guidance? Because I do know that, at least certainly speaking from my organization, that there has been some confusion about what does this mean for a hospital. It sounds like perhaps in this situation, the interpretation has been that they can't have 103s functioning at the same time that they have standardized procedure NPs. Is that your understanding or any guidance around that?
So the 103 NP, even if though they have the designation, they do not have to work in a 103 NP role. They can absolutely continue to work in their standardized procedure role. They don't have to be moved on to those additional kind of job descriptions or roles or anything. They can continue in the role that they have traditionally served, so as there's no job disruption. There has been a lot of guidance, and in actually 7.4, our next agenda item, which we will hear at noon, we do have a presenter coming on, Sarani Kwan, that's going to kind of talk about the employment of 103 NPs. She has participated in some outreach with myself, Reza, Garrett Chan, our chair of our NEWAC committee, et cetera, just in various different venues to try to work on increasing the education and knowledge around what a 103 NP is. There was a lot of misunderstandings and misinformation when AB 890 was moving through the legislative session and when it was originally signed into law. There was a lot of thought that this was just going to kind of break everything wide open and NPs were going directly into independent practice and they were going to work as a similar role to a physician and surgeon automatically. And that was not how it was. There was some misunderstanding out there as well that a certification through the BRN was not needed. So there was no license designation to even be able to look up and verify And that immediately they could have been grandfathered in, and that it encompassed all NPs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot of misinformation that we've been working diligently to kind of get cleared up and redirected. We've been working pretty closely with the California Association of Nurse Practitioners. That is their kind of guiding organization for promotion of their profession, where, of course, the board, our role is public protection. So we have a little bit of a different lens. And so they've been doing a lot of FAQs. I believe they have a version 3 out of FAQs now. And the last 2 versions the board has participated in, where they submitted to us what their questions were and what their answers were. And we went through and reviewed them to ensure that they were saying what was there in regulation and statute, so that they weren't varying from that on the areas that of the FAQs that were board related. There are areas of their FAQ that talk into billing and employment and such, and that's not under our jurisdiction. So our board didn't review and opine on those because that's not under our purview. But the ones that were BRN specific, we did have some input on there. So those are allowing for a lot of things to be cleared up. We are receiving less phone calls and inquiries around the 103 NP. However, we're still receiving a lot of those. But it is starting to change. This was something completely different, where someone was worrying about continuing in their employment because they just had this designation of the license, that all they had to do was remove the designation of the license and they could keep their employment. That again did not make sense to us, because as an RN, you can have several certifications added to you that would just show that, hey, I'm a nationally certified inpatient OB RN. That doesn't mean that I can't work as the EO for the BRN. That has nothing to do with OB. You know, I mentioned previously I was a sexual assault nurse examiner. That doesn't mean I can't work as an EO of the BRN, right? So those are additional competencies that we would hold as an RN or an advanced practice RN. That would just say, hey, I have a breadth of information here that I kind of know and I could specialize in. But that shouldn't discount you from being able to work in a position that doesn't utilize those. And so this person should be able to continue to work in the role of a standardized procedure NP, even though they have the additional competence that they could choose not to work in that role if they did. That was kind of the biggest concern that we had here. Again, it comes down to employment. If the employer has the position and the job for a 103, then a 103 can work as a 103. If the employer does not and they want to continue to work just the standardized procedures, that's a possibility as well. And the 103 NP then would make the decision on whether or not they would want to continue to work in that role under standardized procedures or pursue a different job opportunity that allows them to work as a 103. Knowing that the 103 NP, in order to become a 104, must work in the role of a 103 for 3 years before they can progress to a 104. They cannot just hold that designation and not work in that role and continue to work under standardized procedures. The role, the guidance there is to work as a 103 without any incidences against your license and such, so that you can then progress to the 104. So you're essentially doing more clinical practice and getting some support and stuff while you do that. But the next person will be able to talk into specifics, Mary, to answer any questions you might have about how to work them in not necessarily a dual role, but in have 2 types of NPs within your facility. The other thing that we've heard around this is where people are being forced to go back to school. That has been an employer complaint that we're receiving from our NPs saying, can the board jump in and do anything? And again, no, we can't, other than educate the employer that nobody is required to become a 103. They can choose to be a standardized procedure NP indefinitely. That is available and there to them. So if they have one of these legacy or retired certifications that do not allow them to go to a 103 role, the board is not requiring them to remove themselves from the standardized procedure NP role. Again, that comes down to the employer. If the employer decides to completely move away from employing any standardized procedure NP and only having jobs for 103 NPs, it's up to the employer to make that decision. And the nurse practitioner that may not be a 103, if they wanted to continue in that role, would then be forced to attend a school under that gap analysis we kind of talked about in the previous report out, complete the course requirements and clinical requirements of that academic institution so that they can sit for the board certification of a current board, nationally recognized board certification. And then they would be able to then progress into the 103 role as soon as that national certification is obtained. So just some various employment issues coming around this, knowing that the board does not have any jurisdiction over it, but just providing the education around what those designations mean and what our licensees have the ability to do scope of practice wise if they can work up and down. So they can work at the full extent for the 103, but they can absolutely continue to work as a standard procedure.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee, other committee members?
Yeah, what I still don't understand is why do organizations have a concern about it? What's the problem?
It's new. It's brand new. I think that's one of the biggest things is just it's the unknown. When you look at large organizations, they have policies and procedures outlined into what providers can do, and then they designated who those providers are. They have policies and procedures in alignment to how to use a standardized procedure NP, and not necessarily a more independent practitioner in that role. So it does require some HR changes, some policy changes, some privileging changes and stuff within the board, within the employer. It also looks at liability. So routinely, the nurse practitioner falls under the supervision of a physician and surgeon. And that supervision is no longer required once they become a 103 NP. That they are now not supervised by the physician. They work alongside with the physician within a group setting so that assistance is there for direction as needed, but it's not a supervisory role. So that changes a lot of stuff when they're doing kind of risk and looking to see if there's any incident with it. There is a lot of evidence out there that supports that there's no additional risk to that, but there is also evidence, as we kind of talk about looking at the various evidence, that also support that there is a risk with that. So it really just depends on who you're talking to. Our nurse practitioner organizations would say there is no risk. We've been doing this. This is fine. And our California Medical Association et al. Would be like, there is a risk. They haven't been doing this. This is not fine. And so it really just depends from which lens you're going to look at it, which evidence you're going to look at and weigh and support about how that works. But I think the biggest concern is it's new. And not a lot of people know how to manage that or have processes in place to support that.
So it boils down to being change, which is always difficult. It's a work pill and there's a turf issue.
It does seem to point in that direction. I can't say affirmatively that that's what that is.
I know, I'm saying it, you can't say it, but okay. But the change makes sense and it's a bit of a work pill and okay. Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
other comments or questions?
Oh, I don't have any.
Okay. So that was informational. Can we take it out to public comment, please?
Yes, no motion is needed and we'll go out to public comment.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Monica Christine Nandwani would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, Loretta. Thank you for that information. I was wondering if there's any guidance around the corporate practice of medicine and how that might apply to 103 and 104 NPs.
That cut out on my end. Can you repeat that, please? I'm so sorry.
She was asking for guidance on the corporate practice of medicine and how that applies to, I think, 103 and 104 NPs.
That might actually be more part of Sarani Kwan's presentation on the next agenda item, or at least she may have some ability to direct where she could find that. But I'll kind of punt that to Sarani when she joins us here soon.
Yeah, and to the extent that it's not within item 7.4 about employment for nurse practitioners with the 103 distinction, it's not on this agenda. So it can be proposed for a future agenda. Sorry about that.
It's all good. Thank you.
Vice President Fagan, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Looks like we should be ready to move forward with agenda item 7.4, the presentation by Sarani Kwan.
Looks like we should. I'm not showing that she has arrived yet. Board moderator, she's showing up in attendees.
No, ma'am, she is not.
Nothing yet. Okay. 1 second. Let me make sure I don't have anything in my email where she's having any difficulties of jumping on. Mary, if you're wanting to, we could take a lunch break at this point and get her all wrapped up and done. It is noon. It has been a long morning. That might be something that you guys would consider as we continue to reach out to Sarani and try to get her up and going.
Okay. The committee members or the other board members prefer if we have a half an hour lunch break, or do people need any longer than that?
Half an hour is fine for me, Vicki.
Yeah, half hour is fine for me, Dolores.
Okay. Then why don't we plan to meet back at 12? Let's do 12:40 to be on the
Sure.
even
Okay.
number. Okay.
Thank you
great.
so much. Okay. See you guys at 12:40. Enjoy your lunch.
And now I was on both. So I think, Mark, I can be on my desktop, but I need, I'm not able to do a camera on there, but I could do audio, which is better than my phone. So, but I'll do that after we go ahead and establish a quorum and get started, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's totally fine. But in the meantime, Mark, can you elevate Mary's other connection?
I think I just disconnected from it because that's what was creating all the feedback.
Oh, okay. Okay. Never mind.
It's been one
So
of
yeah,
those
if
days.
you want to, we'll establish a quorum for the practice committee, and then we'll open it up for Sarani, and then you can sign on at that point on
Then
the.
I'll switch over. Okay, sounds great. Thanks. Okay, so this is the reconvening of the Nursing Practice Committee. We'll establish a quorum. This is Mary Fagan, the chairperson. Dolores Trujillo.
Present.
And Vicki Granowitz.
Granowitz present.
And Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita here.
Great. Okay, so we will move on to agenda item 7.3. And Lori, I don't know if you want to introduce Sarani.
Yeah, we'll definitely introduce Sarani. I don't have a bio or anything for her, so sorry, Sarani, I'll probably pass that off to you to give a little background. The way that Sarani was kind of introduced to me as part of this process is we've been on a couple presentations that have been put on to educate the 103s on how they become licensed and certified, how they, what their scope of practice is, how they're working with getting privileges and billing as well as employment. So she's been an asset to really get that information out and to help us kind of take team any misinformation that's come out of there. And so we reached out to her when we started to hear from some of our licensees that they were having some issues with employment. And then also at your request, Mary Fagan, because you wanted to get some more information on how to really effectively employ the 103 NP as well as the standardized procedure NP. So I will turn it over to you, Sarani. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I first want to start off with an apology. I had 12:30 on my calendar and I was running down the hall a little bit after noon trying to find my room that I'm going to do this presentation in. So my apologies. And I'm glad everyone had a chance to have lunch. So just by way of introduction, I am delighted to be here and answer questions about 103 nurse practitioners. My name is Sarani Hairquan. I've been a nurse for 31 years. I've been a nurse practitioner for 31. I have been employed with Sutter Health for 31 years, and I've worked in many different roles. I was in the hospital for 19 years, ran a medical foundation for 5, and I now work for the system office of Sutter Health in Sacramento. And my current role is to oversee clinical practice in the organization, not only for nurses, but also for advanced practice, NPs, PAs, and midwives. And in my nurse practitioner job, I have worked at the Russian River Health Clinic, which is an FQHC out in Guerneville, which is very rural Sonoma County on the Russian River, and also teach as faculty in the Samuel Merritt Nurse Practitioner Program. So those are my jobs. My volunteer position is with the Professional Association California for Association for Nurse Practitioners. And I've been with that organization for 23 years, starting as a student. And I've served as president for the organization, as well as been on the Health Policy and Practice Committee for almost 23 years with the organization. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about what's going on in the state. I do have the honor of getting questions from NPs from across the state, not always members of CANP, also non-members and employers, and also have the lived experience of working for Sutter Health and helping engage our medical groups and our hospitals with 103 nurse practitioners and kind of the benefits that come with that. So to start off with, I think that I will just first talk about kind of what's going well. I have had a couple of really amazing experiences talking with not only organizations like Sutter, obviously Kaiser and Dignity and Tenet are other large healthcare organizations, which I can talk about later. But I will speak from my lived experience of Sutter and then also my responses to NPs and employers across the state as they reach out to the professional association. So I have heard that in some cases, delight that from the HR teams when they realize that standardized procedures will no longer be needed for the 103 nurse practitioners in their organization. And that has gone actually quite well. We had obviously some delays because I think people were very excited. We had lots of people submitting their applications multiple times because they weren't hearing back right away. And so working with the director of licensing, we've been able to sort out those issues one by one and slowly get the 103 nurse practitioners that qualify processed. We also, as you all know, the legacy issue has become something that's a little bit more prominent now than it was initially. We know that the nurse practitioners that are holding legacy certification, still actively nationally certified, excuse me, and in practice, are not allowed to apply for the 103 licensure. And that has actually caused some of the employers of these nurse practitioners to push back and say, you know, how do we get this changed? We thought we were going to be able to have these nurse practitioners functioning without standardized procedures. And, you know, now we have to keep these standardized procedures and we're not very pleased about it. So I have heard that from some of the employers and the nurse practitioners. So with that, though, we've had some very good experiences with nurse practitioners converting to 103 and moving forward without standardized procedures. And the very first thing that happens is that the conversation with the med exec staff or credentialing team has to happen, wondering what to do with the nurse practitioners now. So I've done a lot of presentations to med staffs as well as med executive teams about nurse practitioner privileging. We should have always been privileging nurse practitioners, regardless of whether they function under a standardized procedure or not, no matter what the setting. And that actually hadn't been happening in many of these organizations for whatever reason. And so without the standardized procedure that had been used as a privileging document, not intended to do that, but we've had to kind of detangle that process for many healthcare organizations. So giving information about how to do that. I often will tell people that you really want to look at how you're privileging your physicians in the organization and consider mirroring that process with the 103 nurse practitioners, because they don't have a standardized procedure that you will point to. And by the way, don't do that with your other nurse practitioners that are functioning under a standardized procedure either. And so that's actually gone quite well, slowly but surely getting that sorted out in organizations. And the ability to bill really doesn't change. So two things that I share with physicians that ask the question. Number one, nurse practitioner practice does not change. My work as a nurse practitioner in my primary care clinic has not changed one bit when I converted to a 103. I still do the same type of care that I've always done. And the other thing that hasn't changed is how we bill. So at this point, we don't have a change from insurance companies where they're impaneling nurse practitioners. That likely will happen after 2026. So I am advising organizations that the billing practices that they have in place should stay in place, that there is no reason to change that because the insurance companies, primarily commercial payers, are not impaneling nurse practitioners and therefore don't recognize them as an independent provider of care. So the nurse practitioner will just, the 103s will continue to see patients the way they always have, continue to drop their bills the way they always have. So now I want to just switch very briefly to talk about some of the interesting issues that have emerged since we went live with 103 in mid-January. We have had a couple of healthcare organizations express, I don't know if it's distrust or if it's confusion. It's not clear to me. But the initial presentation by some of the healthcare organizations in the state was that we're not going to recognize any 103, so we're not even going to let our physicians in our organizations sign off and attest to nurse practitioners who actually qualify as 103 nurse practitioners. And we know that in the beginning, in this first round of nurse practitioners applying for attestation, more than likely, the majority of them have been in practice for many, many years. These are not the new grads that are really excited to be 103s. These are people who've been nurse practitioners for decades, in some cases, with their healthcare organizations. So that very first kind of, salvo across the bow of the ship was really concerning for many of us in the professional association. And it also was something that as a staff person with Sutter Health, I wanted to make sure that something like that wasn't going to happen. So I immediately began doing communications to all the medical groups and the med exec teams. So there was very clear communication about what a 103 nurse practitioner benefit is. And And certainly the lift off of getting rid of standardized procedures and the management, the hours of management of standardized procedures was made a lot of logical sense to my internal team. The other concerns that we've had, and I'm not sure, Loretta, if you've shared these, but there is concerns in some healthcare organizations that once they have a 103 nurse practitioner, they're trying to completely disconnect the nurse practitioner from the practice itself. So they are essentially challenging the 103 nurse practitioner in their healthcare settings to become enrolled with insurance companies so they can actually bill for their care. And it's like the nurse practitioners, of course, are throwing up their hands saying, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm not billing independently. I still work for you. My employment status hasn't changed one iota. It's just that I don't need standardized procedures. So obviously a communication and education opportunity in that setting. And then finally, the kind of outright hostility that some nurse practitioners are encountering in the state. We have nurse practitioners who have converted to 103 status and have been told by their employers that they would need to surrender their 103 license or be fired by the organization. And this means be fired for no performance reason whatsoever, only their licensing. And so they are demanding that they go back to functioning with a standardized procedure. So that is kind of the brief overview. I could literally talk to you for hours about all of the things that are going on with 103s, and I'm happy to take questions. But I do want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about the kind of cross pollination of having standardized procedures NPs, as we call them, and 103 nurse practitioners working side by side. In my experience, we've had no issues with that. It is actually the standardized procedure process has been well established for many decades by all of the healthcare organizations that employ nurse practitioners. Some have better standardized procedures than others. I've read hundreds and I've given lots of feedback to bring standardized procedures up to the BRN standards. But having a 103 work alongside a standardized procedure NP really doesn't create any conflict in the organization. And sharing how that looks with organizations has been one of the things that I've added to my presentations when I'm meeting with healthcare employers. Namely, the standardized procedure process remains the same, with the caveat that the organization really needs to be privileging nurse practitioners just like they privilege a physician and any other healthcare provider that's touching patients. So whether that's in the hospital setting or the ambulatory setting, like a medical foundation, privileging is really a key part of the employment process. You credential to make sure that their license is active, et cetera. They have their DEA, and then you privilege to allow them to do certain things. Hospitals tend to have this figured out because they've been doing it for so long, and the Joint Commission really holds their feet to the fire to make sure privileging is very tight. But in the ambulatory setting, we have not done such a good job, and I fear that some of the smaller 1 and 2 doc and NP shops probably don't have a robust credentialing and privileging process. So it will be, I think, a matter of time and education for both nurse practitioners and employers of nurse practitioners to understand why privileging is important and the difference between functioning under a standardized procedure and having privileges to deliver care to patients is going to be a key distinction that I will be focused on going forward. So I think with that, I want to just stop to see if there's any questions specifically that I might answer. Mary, I know you had a question or two.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sharon. This is really, really helpful. So when you were, for organizations, and as you mentioned, hospitals that are currently privileging NPs, when an NP moves to a 103 NP status, do they need to be re-privileged?
Oh, no. The only reason that we would need to re-privilege, I mean, it's not even re-privilege, right? I mean, I have a couple of hospitals even in Sutter that haven't been privileging nurse practitioners that are delivering care in the hospital right now and have been for years, is because they just didn't think they had to. They made an assumption that the standardized procedure was good enough. And somehow Joint Commission doesn't know enough about nurse practitioner practice either, and they just kind of let it fly. I mean, if I was a surveyor for Joint Commission, I would have asked, where's your privileging for this, nurse practitioner? And they would have not been able to produce it. So I think it's really just a lack of knowledge about what the standardized procedure actually is, which is a legal document, versus privileging, which is a different process. So
there's nothing different that needs to be done. Someone's already privileged. You just re-privilege them the way you would if anything had changed to the normal process.
Correct. Okay. Or if I wanted to do something new. So let's say I was working with the intensivist team at one of the hospitals, and I got trained to do chest tubes, and the team is like, okay, we need specialists for chest tube insertions. We're going to send Sarani to go get trained, and then you need to apply for privileges. And when I apply for privileges, the interdisciplinary practice committee will say you have to complete 5 chest tube insertions with a proctor, and then present that back to us, and then we will give you privileges. So that process is in place for physicians, needs to be in place for nurse practitioners. So that would be the only time you approach the privileging team and ask for new privileges, is if you had learned something new and wanted to add it to your privilege list.
Right, which is no different than today.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
I think you've answered all of my questions. Are there any other committee questions from committee members?
I don't have any. Vicki?
I kind of asked this before, but what do you think it's going to take to get some of these organizations to stop asking for people to get rid of their 103s? I mean, is this a political power play, or is it just an educational thing? Do you see any kind of trend with the kinds of organizations that are making these requests? I mean, are they 1 or 2 doctor-run places? Are they major organizations? I mean, anyways.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's political as much as it is power, right? So kind of controlling what happens to the patient is likely the kind of basis of all of this. I do know that there have been some communications by organized medicine that could lead somebody to believe something about AB 890 that is inaccurate. So I've spent a lot of time going through the actual bill that's in law, in the regulations, and actually talking to physicians about the information, because they believe, having read something on an email newsletter, something completely different about what the law actually says. And I'll just share this with you, Vicki. It was quite amazing to me. I was presenting to a very large med exec team, all physicians. There was not any nurse practitioners, physician assistants, or midwives on the committee, because they aren't allowed. And so I was the only nurse practitioner voice in the room. And a physician asked me if, now that a nurse practitioner was 103, if they were going to be allowed to do gallbladder and appendix surgery. And yes, exactly. And I had to not laugh and say, gosh, absolutely not. Despite being a 103 nurse practitioner, I am still a nurse practitioner trained in family medicine. No, we won't begin to do surgeries. We are not trained in surgery. We never have been trained in surgery. And that is, and frankly, I don't see that coming in the future either. So I was quite shocked when he asked that. And he was brutally honest. Like, he truly thought that was going to happen. So I had to explain to him that no, absolutely not. Nurse practitioner practice doesn't change. And I, explained to him that he has a very large intensivist team that is run completely by nurse practitioners, and that those nurse practitioners would continue to do all the work that they have been doing all along. Despite being 103, like their actual work is not changing. Because as a 103 licensed nurse practitioner, I can point to in law, in the regulations, what they are able to do. And privileging defines what the hospital allows them to do to patients. So it was shocking, really, when I got that question.
And then just for our board members, Business Professions Code 2726 specifically says this chapter confers no authority to practice medicine or surgery. That did not change with the update for the 103.
Right.
Right.
So it was very fear-based, in my opinion, Vicki. I felt that physician truly believed that was going to happen, and he wanted to preserve his turf in that hospital, and he wasn't going to let 103 nurse practitioners take over and run surgery. So it's just education. And I'm going back to that same group, and I'm going to be representing to answer those questions only. I'm just going to take questions from the whole group as opposed to doing any formal presentation. Because it was clear to me that there are a lot of confusing messages coming out from their professional associations about a 103 nurse practitioner.
Well, all I can say is this was really interesting, and bless you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
This may be more of a question for Lori, but Lori, would it be possible to put some of this information or on our website so that when people go to our website, they can really get the facts that, as Sarani has been eloquently presented?
Absolutely. It is actually on our website already, but what our intention was by doing this presentation, we will be updating our AB 890 website and put links to this agenda item specifically, as well as the agenda item 7.3 that we previously covered, so that if they are having employment issues, they can go directly to this webcast, hear the board talk, hear the presentation, and be able to share this with their employers if they're running into any issues.
Excellent. And Sarani, you mentioned that you've gone to several MedStaff exec committees. Are you available to do that on a broader scale? And if so,
I am. Yes, I'm happy to do that. My employer supports that, and I'm an advocate. So for me, this is very important information, and as part of the Professional Association for Nurse Practitioners, I feel it's part of my role with the CAMP to make sure that we're all clear about what the law actually says. So yeah, I actually have spoken to a couple of med exec teams up and down the state, but happy to talk to anyone, present to anyone. I offer to come on Zoom. So if it's local, I can come locally. So whatever works.
I think it would be, this is Vicki, I think it would be interesting to have you back in 2 years to see if any of the misinformation has changed and sort of where we are in implementation.
Yeah, that would be great. And what would be even more interesting about that timing is that it's going to be right before the 104 is active.
Right.
So I was just going to say that. Yeah. Yes, that'd be perfect timing, Sarani.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a date. I'll be back.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions for Sarani? We can take this out to public comment.
I don't have any further questions. Vicki?
No.
Okay.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in the request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give reminders as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Monica Christine Nanwani would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, Sarani. Thank you so much for your advocacy and for making so many of those outstanding questions clear. One question, I guess one comment that I had was one of the outstanding questions for our institution is whether or not the 103 NPs would fall under the corporate practice of medicine because of one of the statements that the California Medical Association had previously sent out. And so that's something that we're trying to work through based on who employs our advanced practice providers, because it's separate from who employs our physicians. So I'm just wondering if you've encountered any similar questions from other organizations and what guidance you might have on that.
Great question. I'm not an attorney. Reza is. So he's welcome to join in, but I will say that we are aware of the publication that was that stated that, and that was sent out in, I believe, in January of this year, and that was retracted. So CANP actually went to CMA and challenged them on their publication and the information that they shared as patently false, and they retracted it. Unfortunately, you know how it is with the internet. Once you put something out there, even though it has been retracted by the originator, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people who have read it, all of the eyeballs that have seen that information, can forget it, right? So it is, at this point now, a matter of just education, education, education. And to date, I have not yet had another organization come to me and challenge that particular concept.
This is Reza, the board's legal counsel. Yeah, I was not aware of the statement, the specific statement that the Association of Medicine had put out. I know that the board had received some questions from various individuals about corporate practice of medicine, and now that might kind of hint at why. It didn't strike me as you know, a hindrance. I mean, the legislative intent of AB 890 couldn't have been clearer as to, you know, the intent of getting 103 NPs and eventually 104 NPs, but NPs free from standardized procedures in a process that could allow them to do so safely and competently. So, yeah, I'd be interested to know more about that statement, but glad to know that it was retracted, and hopefully that the effect of it and the information that's disseminated out there is accurate going forwards, and the effect of that kind of diminishes over time as there's just greater awareness of AB 890. I think even though, you know, those of us who are staff, board members, and those stakeholders who have been actively engaged through the legislative process and the board's process of implementing this. Obviously, to us, we're intimately familiar, but there's a whole, bigger world out there of healthcare providers and administrators and things who, weren't as engaged throughout the process and are going to be getting up to speed as time progresses, and it is still quite new. So, best we can do is do our best to address that misinformation and those misperceptions and things. And very grateful to our speaker just now for joining us and being an active participant out there in the community trying to help do that.
Thank you, Reza. I'll share that information with you too as well, just so you have it for your files.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Alyssa Brown would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, thank you, Sarani. My name's Alyssa Brown. I'm a clinical nurse specialist, another APRN. I really appreciate your advocacy and education, and I think that's really the key is education. I think I would not have been so surprised with some of the questions that came because I think there's always been a power struggle, and just adding something more into the mix, just maybe gives them more things to question. So I hope you continue to do this. I think one of the problems that I'm concerned about is, every institution is so different. When I worked in one VA, we did have privileging for CNSs and NPs. Another one did not. And I don't know, about some of the community places. So, there's going to be some culture changes that I think we have to be prepared for. So really appreciate you doing that. And I'll have to explore what's going on with the VA and this at this point. because they were moving towards, full practice authority a while ago. But thank you again. I just want to mention one more thing that came when I was at ANA, that the AMA passed a resolution wanting all nurse practitioners to be governed in every state by their Board of Registered Nursing and the medical board. And so
Yes,
I
aware of
think
that.
yeah. So one more thing, that they've tried to do, but something we'll deal with. So thank you.
Absolutely. And the VAs are fully independent. So we've achieved that in the VA, which is wonderful.
Thank you for your comment. Carmen Comsty would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
You, Sarani, for your presentation. I'm Carmen Comsty. I'm lead regulatory policy specialist with the California Nurses Association. I just wanted to second some of the issues that you raised that we've seen with some of CNA's members who are nurse practitioners. We've also heard from nurses that there are employers who who have tried to tell physicians not to attest for nurses who want to become 103s. I really appreciate the efforts of the BRN and the board to put together some clarifying information on your website and to help get through some of the misinformation that has been out there about 103s and what is and is not required of 103s and what the bill actually did. I think another issue that I just want to raise up here is that, some of our nurse practitioners who aren't trying to become 103 nurses are now seeing requirements from their employers that they need national certification because the employers are pointing to the BRN's 103 regs as requiring national certification. So, there's clearly a lot of misinformation out there about 103s. And again, I really appreciate the board's efforts to try to make some clarity on the issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And I appreciate the support that CNA has given to those nurse practitioners in Northern California.
Thank you for your comment. Ruby Hickson would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Having me speak. My name is Ruby Hickson. I'm an ICU nurse practitioner. I practice at UCSF in their ICUs. And I want to say thank you for all the advocacy and education you're giving to the community and to our medical community. But my concern is the language in the section 1487, where it says that the nurse practitioner shall use a standardized phrase, enfermera especializada or enfermero especializado. I am a Mexican-American nurse practitioner that has been practicing for 12 years. I have introduced myself to all my patients as an enfermera practicante, which is the literal term of a nurse practitioner. Any 2-year or 4-year registered nurse can be an enfermera especializada. They can be just like your renal dialysis nurse. That is a specialized nurse. A critical care nurse is a specialized nurse. This language in section 1487 does not represent the advanced practice provider, especially the nurse practitioner. So I have written to the board, but I never really got a response to my request on addressing this, because a lot of literature has come out that the nurse practitioner, even if they're not Hispanic, will try to speak with the patient that is from Hispanic background and, try to speak in their language, but it's the way you are introducing yourself. If you introduce yourself as an enfermera especializada, you're just saying you're a specialized nurse. You are not a nurse practitioner. You're not an advanced practice, nurse practitioner. And I would like the assistance of the Board of Registered Nurses to really look into that specific language. I am working with the National Association of Hispanic Nursing to get a common language that we can give to and to put out as a statement that this is what you call a nurse practitioner. There has been a lot of education from Telemundo, from the YouTube videos that a nurse practitioner is called an enfermera practicante. We do not want to confuse roles, especially if we're, we are going into the 103, 104, but I do not want confusion for my people, my my Latinx community. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I literally just had the same conversation with my translator in clinic last Friday, literally. And we had the exact same conversation. He said to me, that's not what we call nurse practitioners. He's based in Mexico, he's in Guadalajara, and the patient speaks a little bit of English. I speak a little bit of Spanish. So the three of us actually literally just had this conversation about what do we call nurse practitioners and what is the difference between a nurse and a nurse practitioner. And my patient, who knew me, knows of all the education I've had, agreed that practicante is the best thing to say as opposed to especializada, which I've been doing for years, honestly. I would love to see a national standard. And also, Loretta, I'm just going to say, I'd like you to also approach the California Association for Nurse Practitioners so we can be aware of that information as it becomes available nationally and perhaps put that in place in California in the future. So
absolutely.
Great conversation.
That was actually a concern brought up by our board staff in the discussions with the Nurse Practice Advisory Committee, as well as the subcommittees that were specifically set to make the regulations. We argued in public comment and as well in presentation at the committees that a nurse specialist can't be anybody. People specialize in OB, they specialize in NICU, they specialize in emergency, and we had those conversations. The board can't change that. That was written into the law. In the bill AB 890, in the section that it amended, added 2837.104, down in 4D, it says a nurse practitioner shall verbally inform all patients in language understandable to the patient that a nurse practitioner is not a physician and surgeon. And it specifically said that for purpose of Spanish language speakers, the nurse practitioner, and they used the word shall, which is must. The board has no ability to change that. Use the standardized phrase enfermera especializada. So our board cannot change that. And in fact, it is in statute, in law that was put in there by AB 890. And it gave us a direction that we had no ability to move away from. So if this is an issue and if this is problematic, that is not something us as a board can fix. We can't alter regulation to fix because we have a shall. So that would have to go through a legislative process to get that cleaned up. And so again, a lot of these things already brought up, already issues that our board identified, but that literally our board's hands are tied. We're given the authority that we have through the statute that is in front of us. And this statute absolutely directs every nurse practitioner to use that term and that term only when verbally informing only patients that are Spanish language speakers in that language. So you can't vary from that. If you did vary from that, you can say, I am this enfermera especializada as well as, or also known as, and then use the practitioner language. But you can't not choose to use that phrase because that is a legal requirement that was put in there through statute.
And this is Reza. I just wanted to add that the only reason, so as Lori explained, the statute that was implemented by the legislature is what established the term enfermera especializada, and the BRN doesn't have control of that. We can implement regulations to interpret the statutes, but on that one, it was pretty directive, as Lori stated. The only reason that the BRN added anything regarding that in the regulation, and rather than just leaving it to the statute, was that it was raised that in Spanish language that there's the masculine and the feminine version of the term, and so to simply address that, we felt we had at least enough leeway to clear that piece up, but we didn't have enough leeway to go and change the term in a substantive way or anything like that. But as Lori said, I would agree. I think it's in practice, a good thing to, explain as best you can, use the term that's legally required, but also as best you can, make sure that the patient understands what your actual role is.
Yep.
Thank you for your comments. There are no other public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. I think that moves us on to agenda item 7.6, which is adjournment. The
Thank you.
Nursing Practice Committee is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa, we are passing the baton to you to open up the Education Licensing Committee meeting. Board moderator, can you ensure that